Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to be in community with all of you. My name is Jay Babalota. I am the Vice President of Global Programs at Mozilla, and I'm the Executive Producer of MozFest. Today, we're going to talk about ancestral technologies and knowledge systems and how they can help us build for the present and for the future. The idea for this conversation actually came about when we sort of posed the questions to ourselves. What can we learn from our ancestral technologies to ensure that our right now make away technologies are actually fit for purpose? Can we build tools for liberation? Can we transcend platform harms or bias? Can we bypass a monopolized web or extractive data mining? And so we had the good fortune of gathering in good community with the folks on this panel. So who have epic bios. And so I encourage you to seek each of them out. But in brief, we're joined by Toshi Regan, who's a composer, librettist, musical director, co-creator of the Parable of the Sower opera. And we're excited to be in collaboration with her. And Amelia Winger-Bearskin, who's an artist and researcher. She's the founder of Wampum Codes and is also a former Mozilla Fellow. Celine Saman, who's the executive director of Slow Factory, and L. Franklin Gilliam, who's an artist, designer, and senior design officer at the Lambent Foundation. And I encourage everyone on the panel to introduce themselves in all kinds of other ways, as you easily could, and perhaps do so the first time that you speak. It would be wonderful to hear where you're coming from. One last thing, we're taking questions for this panel in real time. So tweet them at Mozilla Festival with the hashtag dialogues and spelled out debates. And if you're watching on the MozFest Plaza or Vimeo, you can use the chat function to add your questions. Okay, so to kick us off, let's set the stage for the conversation. I'd like to just unpack the term technology. What is technology to you? What technologies already exist in our bodies, in our ecologies? And Toshi, I'm going to pass that to you to jump us off.
Thank you. Good morning or evening, wherever you are. I'm Toshi Regan, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape. And technology, I use the word technology a lot. I'm like the technology of breathing, the technology of being quiet, the technology of, it's the creation of systems or processes to get something done or to create something. And I think that when I think about the technology of my ancestors, I always think about the vibrations that they could make with their bodies, and a lot of times their voices and how they use sound to reach each other, and specifically with song and music and things like that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. It's open to the rest of our panelists if you'd like to jump in.
I'll jump in. To me, technology is any extension of our body. So to echo a little bit what Toshi was saying, on the vibration part, it could be your thoughts, how you are, just creating anything around you that extends your body's purpose. So it could be a pencil or even, our glasses, and it's our way to expand ourselves and to reach other people in wherever they could be, or to manipulate our environment. And just like, any creature on this planet would create any type of tool or any type of object to expand themselves. We could see it, by observing ants. We could see it by observing nature and ourselves as well. I think the main purpose of technology is to expand ourselves, expand our abilities, and to reach one another.
Thank you for that.
I would say that Technology is also how we are in community with one another. So that technology could be the way that we form governance, the way that we maintain peace, the ways in which we communicate our values and encode them for future generations, and the way that we pass information from our ancestors to our descendants.
Thank you, Amelia. Franklin, anything on?
Yeah, I also really like to think about technology as kind of using something against its intended purpose.
It's very deep and gorgeous. And I think you bring up such an important point that we're kind of called to ask, like, what function does it serve to think about technology as ahistoric, right? That if it's only ever new, who is it in fact serving? And so what does it mean when we think of and build technology, and if we're only thinking of the future, right? And we have to use speculative tools to imagine it. What about ancestral knowledge? How do we bring that knowledge and wisdom into our practices? And I think that's it's important to actually open up the window into what we're talking about here. Amelia, can I toss it over to you?
Yes, absolutely. I like to think about, we do think of technology, it always in the new, always forward facing, in our today's culture with technology. But I like to think of it as, if I'm communicating with my future descendants, responding from information that I've been given from my ancestors, I need to abstract the information down to the core values of what I've been taught, so that I can make sure that I future proof it for the next generations. And so in this way, it needs to be abstracted. Like, if I were to try to explain what a website is to someone 3 years in the future, it would already be completely out of date, and I would need to re-explain how this works. And then imagine that 7 generations in the future. I would have to talk about what existed in my community and culture that made me want to express this idea in this way, and what values it contains, and what values I'm hoping to share for that future generation. So I like to think about my contributions to technology as how it would activate within a community of care and trust, and then abstract that for future generations, which really just means boiling it down to the values of what I'm hoping it will do for the world and why that is necessary, so that hopefully that message will transcend that space and that time for my descendants to understand what change were we trying to make, and what valuable information did we have that could make a positive change now, and what effect we were hoping that would have on them.
Mm, mm. I'm wondering what that sparks in you, Toshi, thinking about what it means to sing lines that have been sung for multiple generations, and how they take the same shape and different shape. And do you think that meaning is transmuted through those lines?
I mean, I'm so moved by what Amelia just said, because I think that it's what you have and what you do with it is, I don't know if that's a technology, but that's what you made me think about, Amelia, is, I'll never forget being on a panel with my mom one time where, I guess it was in the early 2000s, and it was a big music conference, and all of the companies were there, and ASCAP and BMI were there. So it's everybody who monetizes music is in the room, and the artists, as we monetize music as well. And it was right when the like digital stuff started to be very accessible to everybody. And so there was a lot of like good and chaotic energy. And so there were fights on the panel between companies, and the question was about technology. What do you think about this technology, and what is it's going to do? And I mean, it was like long answers, long answers, long answers, long answers, long answers. And it hits my mom, and she goes, technology is just a tool to take away what you already have and what you already know, and keep it the access far enough away from you so that you forget that you have it, and then make you have to pay for it to have it again. Mm-hmm. That's all she said. And then they were like, next. I was next. And I was like, I got nothing. Like, so it really makes me think about like, knowing what to do with what you have, because I think that's just our major struggle around any systems we create. It can be beautiful systems, but if you're either separated from, the root systems of some of your indigenous practices, which almost always connect your day-to-day process of like existing to spirit and the dream world, to respect for the sunrise and the want of the rain and balance with your crops. Like, this is the basics of humans on the whole entire planet. If you're separated from that, you will never know like what you need and why you need it. And when it's time to activate it, you'll just move with the contemporary currency of commerce and that activation. And so when I think about the music, and I say music and vibration at the same time, because there's people who don't sing, but they vibrate. Everybody vibrates, even if you can't hear yourself vibrating. I like to say to them, it's a base. It's a foundational base, and you can't control it. Your body will do it with or without you, and so I just feel so connected, Amelia, to what you said from that point of view.
Thank you. I see nodding, Celine. You want to jump in there?
I just wrote on a piece of paper, knowing what to do with what you have, Toshi's mother. I just feel like that's so much about what we talk about at Slow Factory, because we work primarily with what we call waste, but it's not really, like, the word is so loaded with so many, layers and layers of shame and layers of taboo, because the way that the system has been designed. And talking about technology, I mean, someone has to design that technology, someone has to think of it, and someone has to think about who is going to be using it and who is not going to be using it, and who's not allowed to using it. A bit to going back to what your mother was saying, Toshi, about like, it's something that's created to make you forget you already have it, and then at the end of the day you have to pay to access it. So in the case of music or music in tech, but in the case of, for instance, the many things that we are creating at such a large scale. I mean, just recently there was Fashion Week, and I think it was Balenciaga who sent out invitations to the elite folks that they invite using a broken iPhone in a case, and then they engraved behind the broken iPhone the invitation, and then you toss the iPhone. It's just the same as paper, and of course it's to make a criticism, but of course it's also ironic and extremely wasteful to just treat e-waste as something that you could just engrave on it and toss, and it's fashionable, it's waste luxury, but it just continues to contribute in waste colonialism, where the extractions of these items that are extremely precious from, and creating conflict in countries in the global south just to extract the minerals that are needed for our phones. And our phones are designed, that's the technology, for us to use them just a short amount of time. And yes, they're not designed to being disassembled, they're designed to being tossed away into this unknown place that we throw away. And then what happens then, and just going back to what you were saying, knowing what to do with what you have is very deep and beautiful. And I think in a lot of ways we try to say that and we try to express that because we already have so much technology, objects, all of these things are at a scale that we are now even creating, killing more species, burning forests, digging up holes to store these items. So those are landfills. This is how we make a landfill. And so even at the Slow Factory, we work around landfills as museums, which is the idea of treating the landfill as an archaeological site for us to start understanding the sort of technological madness we're in, and that system that we've holding on to so tightly, that system that we've designed that's loaded with shame, because we clearly know that this is not natural. This is not something that works at all. So I'm just riffing off here of what you were saying.
I feel like that moment, like where the band plays a really good song and you're like, I want to introduce my musicians. And so I'm mindful, like, would you, Celine, could you introduce yourself? Toshi introduced herself, but could you also introduce yourself?
Oh, did I not? I'm so sorry.
No,
Yes,
I just did. I tried to be more
I thought you
impromptu
did
about the
already.
intros.
Let's get
but
into it.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Celine Saman. I am one of the co-founders of the Slow Factory. And the Slow Factory is a non-for-profit working at the intersection of climate justice and human rights. And we work primarily in fashion because fashion is such a utilitarian art form. We unfortunately can't walk around naked in most countries in this world. So by default, we are interacting with fashion, and we use it to express ourselves, but we also, it is used and we are being used by it to erase our identities in a lot of ways and to force us to conform in a lot of ways in certain things. And anyway, we muse on all these things and we look into all these things. And Slow Factory is a school and a lab, and we're opening up our first school in Brooklyn in the fall. That is also a school and a lab, but it's a physical space open for all. And we are known for our free educational classes, and we will continue to provide free education for anyone who's interested in these topics.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much. Amelia, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and then Franklin, I'm going to ask you a question and also ask you to introduce yourself.
Yes, so I'm Amelia Winger-Bearskin, and I'm a Banks Preeminence Endowed Chair of Artificial Intelligence and the Arts at the University of Florida. And I'm also the founder of Wampum.Codes, which is a podcast where I interview incredible Indigenous people who are making positive change in their communities using technology in creative and incredible ways. And it is also a framework for value-based dependencies in software development. So very excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. Franklin, in addition to telling us who you are, I wondered if you could also lean into this idea of art practices as a form of technology, and then maybe you could name which particular lineage of art or cultural traditions you reference and the ways that you imagine the future through them.
That's a really good question. with other people really sort of like played out. So as an artist, I really work a lot with this idea of what's new and what's obsolete and what's been discarded. And I think the more my, sort of day job became about helping people think through what technology they invested in or what they didn't invest in or what systems or knowledge processes they were working with, the more my creative work became about stuff that had been discarded and that was old and that was really not considered new anymore. So I get a lot of energy from thinking about what the values were that were sort of instilled in developing something and questioning those values. One sort of thing that comes to mind is a role-playing game that I worked on, that I designed, called Lesberation. And the idea there was that you take something and you lesberate it, you sort of flip it from its intended purpose. And, it comes from that, Jill Nelson famously uses that term lesberate to like describe how people need to just like get out and do whatever, TF they want. And but in this game, the players had to play collaboratively and work cooperatively. And their playing pieces were all of these pictures of just like old tossed out stuff. It was like an old fax machine. It was like an old radio, like an old boot, like, just all kinds of stuff. And you had to take that stuff and make something new out of it. So like that to me is just an example of like how you might use art to kind of help people think in a different way and almost play and kind of experiment with reusing the things that they have. But I'm really enjoying the conversation and this idea about really questioning the values that were, put into something that you designed. And I just kind of had this idea, which is like, like when you're writing code, you sort of like, you put in those two hashtags and you sort of like comment in and you say, like you may explain something about your code, and it really feels like we need something similar for the kind of values that are instilled in what we're doing. And Amelia, that really, what you were saying about sort of like looking at how what you're making impacts the next generation, it just sort of made me think about that, about a certain, it's having a certain kindness and grace and understanding about what has come before is also really important. And not thinking about what's missing in that kind of like, hey, boomer kind of way, but also thinking about like, what were the conditions that created this thing and how can we find a different use for it.
Toshi, what do you think about art practices as being a form of technology? And also, I frankly, one of the things that you spurred in me was this through line that's been coming up. It's very interesting, like in a lot of conversations around joy. And I think like, given the state of things, I also think like there's a way that we've also been handed down joy and celebration, and thinking about ancestral joy and thinking about that as a technological practice. And I'm thinking about how that weaves in our artistic practice. So Toshi, I'm just curious if that spurs anything in you.
Yeah, I think so much of, what we now call art comes out of our everyday living. There's so many songs that are work songs. There's so much songs that are around praying. There's so many, people had to create everything they use. So they created the spoon and they created the, how to build a fire. They created everything. Everything is, now can be categorized as an artistic presence. So it's, indigenous practices of our ancestors that still work. And I think like the way I think about it is like, every time there's new things built off of that, whether they're in the category of art or they're a beautiful refrigerator that's like, indicative of something from a long time ago, and that's a part of the design, and that's why we like it. It costs so much money, right, that they just tell you the truth about how possibly useless they are. and like, so that once you get so far away from the kind of creating that I think, our ancestors did, it just was very specific. It was very necessary. And even quilts, we're like, we're going to warm you, but at the same time, we're going to tell you stories about how to free yourself. And we're going to show you the universe and stars. Like, almost all of our cultures have this conversation going on. But the distance in, the creation of technology around art is it's so commercial, and it's so it's done this weird loop. It's like, yay for radio, yay, oh wow, my voice is on the phonograph, yay for this, yay for that. And then all of a sudden it whipped around. It has all your information. It tracks you all the time. And it uses the technology of, sound and joy and all of the things we had already. And it comes back around and tells you what to do in order to get access things that you need. And so it's a little bit frustrating, because I think as the world is in an epic state of chaos and destruction, like where we're like, now the articles are like, you're 10 minutes from this being gone. You're 10 minutes from the Amazon, y'all, the Amazon. We are so close. They're just green things growing where they didn't used to grow. It's the evolution of the planet saying, forget y'all, I'm going to recreate myself. But we can't stop that conversation. And I think when we think about, like, you're asking me to think about, how art and technologies work, I would like, how would divestment technologies work? Mm-hmm. Because I think, like, part of the thing that the planet is doing is being very free in a response to assault. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what we're doing is, can we continue to have this just like epic, runaway, train of exploration in creating over and over and over again the systems we have had for such a long time, but making them more and more violent. And so I just see us at odds, with the technology of the planet's natural creation and innovation, and our innovation. We are separate. We don't have a relationship. Like our indigenous practices, our creation and our art had such a much better relationship to the actual planet. And ours is so far away and very expensive with currency, which is something we made up. Mm-hmm. And is so we're very far away from that, those kinds of things. And I think about all the time, not how to get back to that, but how to get grounded in the reality of our right now, so that we can use some of those technologies to assist us in our, efforts of balance, honestly, for our descendants. So, I don't know, I said a whole lot, but, we're the good thing about an old practice holding its space in these times is that, at least at a spiritual and heart level, it can remind you of the possibilities of yourself. Mm-hmm. And the more that can happen, the better our chances are on planet Earth right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot of things about what you just said, but one of the things that is that this isn't just an interesting conversation, right? This is a necessary conversation. Like, this is a required conversation in this moment. And we could pretend that that's not the case or not. And I think that that's a decision. We're at this sort of fulcrum, and maybe we always are, but we're at a fulcrum of decision-making of, like, are we going to prioritize, and there's probably already language for this, I'm just using the language that comes to my mind, commodified technologies or collaborative technologies. Like what I think we've already established is technology is not this new shiny thing. It's the systems by which we operate in concert with one another. And the question is, how much in concert are we willing to be engaged? And what do we already know shake free what we're being told we know and what the tools of the day would have us know, right? So I think that that's kind of, that's it, that's the tree you just shook from me, or the amalgam of everything that we've just discussed. Like that's where I'm coming to in that. And I think that that's also maybe what it also undoes is this idea of like the future and the past as being these binary places that we either came from or we're going to, right? And so Celine, I'm gonna pass it over to you, but I wonder about how do we course correct, and like how does that show up in your work?
Yeah, definitely. So I really resonated a lot with what you were saying regarding our relationship to this planet, our relationship to nature, and oftentimes, we've been socialized to believe that we are separate from nature, we are using it, and we need it to survive, and basically we are exempt from it. And even the way that we've been taught biology at school, or even geography, or all of these topics, we've always been looking at them from as if we were looking at nature from binoculars, or through a technological tool that is literally separating us from this experience. And I think what we do at Slow Factory, a lot of the work that had to be done was a lot of narrative change, if you will, or at least re-education or unlearning on all of these words that now are becoming very popular. But in the past, it wasn't popular at all, and it was contested. In fact, when we were saying, well, let's look at it for a minute, let's understand it from a different perspective here. Because so far this perspective has completely separated us from nature. And what happens? What are the consequences? How are we designing systems where we believe we are, untouchable or above nature, above all other creatures? And in fact, even in that mindset, there's a hierarchical, structure that's called white supremacy that also continues to create further and further misalignments with who we are as humans, and who we are in relationship to nature, and who we are and how are we going to coexist on this planet and create systems that are mimicking nature, or at least honoring nature and looking at nature as our guide and as our spiritual it's spiritual ecology. It's a lot of different things, and I know potentially Amelia, you're going to be so much more versed to talk about it than I am, because I'm from Lebanon and we've survived 3,000 years of colonization, and in that work we've lost a lot our relationship to the land. We've been completely detribalized, successfully detribalized, I would say, because it was under colonial rule, and we've lost our knowledge that we've tried to keep from generation to generation. You could still see a few things, but overall, and in the work that we do with Slow Factory in documenting this knowledge in the Middle East, here in occupied indigenous land here in America that we call America and the Americas, we really work from very globally, and our goal is to document this knowledge and to present it as accessible as possible to, as you were saying earlier also, Amelia, to the many generations that will precede us. And how do we do that? Right now we're using a digital way to doing that, but what if there's a huge explosion and all these databases are gone? So everything is so ephemeral and fragile. At the end of the day, these technologies that feel so powerful and manly, like they can't stand a storm. So at the end of the day, we are going to be keeping, as you were saying also, Toshi, like this vibration that we own. I just want to shout out a dear friend of mine, Christine Platt. She is an author and she writes from blood memory, and she taught me this term. So I'm shouting her out here, because as you were all talking a little bit about that, about how we can, translate this information from our ancestors all the way to today. And then when we disappear, how does this information continue to coexist? And it's super fascinating. And we are definitely in asking each other these questions, like how do we leave these breadcrumbs of information so that others can find them and continue changing their environment, changing the way the systems are, in order for them to build things that are for their well-being, for the well-being of themselves and their descendants. And as we were doing that, I was discussing with a scientist friend, Adib Dada, who's Lebanese and who works in Lebanon in biomimicry and restoring a lot of land that has been completely destroyed by war. And he was telling me, oh my God, you are doing stigmergy. And I'm like, what is stigmergy? And he's like, well, that's how ants communicate with each other. And then I wrote it down and I felt so smart. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to tell everyone that we are like ants, because we are leaving breadcrumbs of information, altering our environment, and leaving information so that other species and others in our family can find their way. And so I felt like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Let's be like ants.
Amelia, I heard you get invited to pick up that
That
thread.
was beautiful. Well, I love connecting so much with non-human systems and looking at the ways in which we are collaborating, always with our plant, kin, and with our animals and ants. So thank you for calling out the other creatures here into the space who are vibrationally connected to us today. So I am Seneca Cayuga Nation, and I'm here. I'm tuning in today from Brooklyn as well. And this was part of a lot of our trade territory and our ancestral land. And I think a lot about the earliest technology that colonists were very fascinated by our Confederate democracy, like coming from a land of kings. They were looking at how were you once warring 6 nations and were able to establish peace and prosperity among 6 different nations. And through that, our complex system of government was what, the US founding fathers were very inspired by. I would say that they forked our repo and got a little bit of malware in there and missed a lot of the core value-based dependencies in there, which were, based on centering our environment, having women lead voting, and having men and women serve in different yet incredibly balanced ways in our culture. So there was a lot of things from the jump that they got wrong, but they were very inspired by this brand new technology that existed in the Americas that didn't exist in Europe, which was this Confederate democracy. And so I think about that. And I also think about this narrative that started from the second that we had colonial contact. And it was the idea of the vanishing native person. And they had this idea that from the second they met us, we became impure through their contact, right? And we became impure, and our culture just started to degrade. We just started to disappear. All this almost as if it was a natural phenomenon, right? Rather than a product of colonialism. But we see that even in like the photographs of Edward Curtis. He went around in the 1800s to photograph the vanishing native, and he would dress us up like fake natives so that we could show that like what he thought we should look like. We weren't looking like that anymore. So he'd dress us up and photograph us. So from the very beginning of like recording technology, like photographs, one of the very first things that he was able to secure a grant for an artistic expression was to capture this vanishing indigenous person. And so whenever I hear that narrative of something that is almost at extinction, it's going to disappear, and yet we need to use all this technology to capture it, I find it very sus because that was a tool that was used to actually genocide us, right? Like that concept that we have to capture what is really you because the true you has disappeared through our contact with you is a lie, and it's a tool of genocide. And so when I hear that, especially in climate justice, we use that same kind of colonialist narrative. I hear it all the time in conversations like XYZ is about to vanish. We have to go in, like that emergency costs more technology needs to go in to capture it. That capturing, of course, makes the problem worse, and the cycle continues. And so I think breaking that cycle is part of understanding that that we have not disappeared, that we have not vanished, that our ancestral knowledge is still with us, that we still have access and accessibility to that we are still part of the land, we are not separated from it, that we are part of these animal and non-human systems, and we are not separate from them, that we are not in an action of trying to save something, that we are saving ourselves, right? Like all of these kind of things that seek to separate us from a once pure past or something, which is, it's just all it's kind of ridiculous. It's more like we are still connected. We haven't lost the connection. We still have that blood memory, as you may say. And I think that that's really key and important. And I love what Toshi's mom said about, it's like, I'm highly suspect of someone who's trying to sell my culture back to me, who's trying to sell my community back to me, someone who's trying to sell my artistic imagination back to me, and also someone who's trying to say that we will return, and that, like, I think that it fuels a notion of accelerationist thinking to say that things are so bad, they're so destroyed, they've been so impure, there's no going back. All of that makes people feel totally hopeless and overwhelmed, and they believe that there's nothing that they can do. So, oh well, I guess I just have to do the best I can. And everyone should do the best they can, and no one has an opt-out function when it comes to climate justice, right? No one says, well, it's been XYZ hard for me, so therefore I can't be part of the solution. We need everyone, especially those who are most vulnerable. It doesn't mean that they should bear the burden of leading and carrying everyone, but it means that we really do need the voices of everyone, and everyone has to find a place within this movement. We all need to find our place within this movement. So thank you for the invitation on speaking on this. And I wanted to throw that out there, that I don't know. What do you all think about that notion of something that is vanishing or is not here anymore as being it's a lie inside of a lie? And I would love to know what other people think about that.
I'm just going to jump very quickly, and I will let everybody else. This doom and gloom strategy that we've been under for all sorts of things regarding wars in the Middle East, or the climate change issues, or racial justice in America and around the world. This idea that exactly what you were saying, that it's an accelerist point of view where it's already gone. And we've been conditioned throughout all the, movies and art that's been created over and over again about this idea of a desert, that it's going to become a desert. And I find that extremely offensive coming from the Middle East, because a desert is so beautiful and so full of life and so rich. What are you talking about? A desert is dead. It's not dead. Try walking in it without getting caught or getting eaten by some creature, So essentially, this idea of doom and gloom is a strategic plan, essentially, because at the end of the day, it disempowers the collective. It disempowers the youth. Right now, there's a rise in anxiety and depression within the youth because of this doom and gloom narrative, that it's too late. Look at all these species that have been extinct. Look at all the plastic we're eating. Look at all of these things. And it becomes so much bigger than yourself that you surrender. You surrender to it, and then you become basically a part of it, because there's nothing you can do. There's so many studies around it, but that's all I wanted to say, is that doom and gloom strategies are by design, essentially.
Yeah, I run this climate justice lab at my university, and something I'm interested in doing is how can we simulate data in playful, joyful ways. I love the way that the youth are using online games like Minecraft and Roblox and building essentially their own universes, their own governance systems, their own economies. And I'm like, how could we visualize climate data? I personally do believe that it's so disempowering to do everything with blame and with shame. I think that's like the primary core emotions that are used in communicating around climate justice, is a lot of shame and blame, doom, gloom, right? But what about how we can have like restorative justice and restorative interactions? And so I always ask when I give talks, what types of interactions would people want to simulate online? Like, would we want to simulate decentralized economies, or connecting spiritually with water? Or I don't know, I'm always happy to listen to whatever anyone wants to simulate, because those are the kind of, I use gaming as language, but it's really collective storytelling and world building, right? Love to hear what people's like dream simulation would be to play in, to like, it's a way of praying, it's a way of having joy, it's a way of building ourselves so we can continue to live and fight another day,
All right, there's a challenge here, dream simulations. Where are you? We plop you down, Franklin, you're in your dream simulation. Tell us about it.
Yeah. I have to respond, because I just love this flow that's happening about is the perfect way to do that. And I don't know what business journal or whatever I was looking at that was sort of talking about, Netflix not being afraid of other streaming services, but they're like afraid of Twitch and any gaming, well, not really Twitch, but you know what I mean, like any gaming world, because it can take so much time and energy, and it's also, it's creative, it's like proactive, it's like a completely opposite mode, to what Netflix is selling. I would love to see some modeling around kind of non-capitalist futures, like to really think about how do we get out of this system that's been handed down to us, and so many people have been fighting against for such a long time. But like, what does it really look like to for huge swaths of people and in decentralized ways, to try to live cooperatively, to try to think about an anti-capitalist approach. And we're now living at this moment where we sort of see how things are modeled, and we try to understand like how is this pandemic or multiple pandemics going to impact our lives. So I love this idea of modeling to try to imagine what happens in the future and when it might happen. Right.
We have a question from Twitter, so I want to bring it into the room. The people on this panel are using the word we a lot. Who is the we they are speaking to? Who do they wish to communicate with, to reach? This could also be linked to the question of creating ancestral AI. To whom does such an AI communicate? Would animal knowledge also be part of such ancestral knowledge? We could look to bacteria, the original ancestors. That's for anyone who would like to respond.
Well, when I say we, it's interesting, and we and I are really important in my singing culture. We have the song "We Shall Overcome," and then the song was originally "I'll Overcome." There's the song "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine." And just the difference between the two is the I is more of a guarantee than the we is, because if your I am going to do something, then at least you are going to do something. And the we is a call to all who can hear the sound of your voice. That's the we. And when I say the sound of my voice, I don't mean literally the sound of my voice, but at some time it was literally the sound of your voice. I don't know who this person is, but if you ever got called by a parent, then you were like somewhere else and you could hear the sound of their voice. You weren't the only one hearing the sound of your person's voice. Like we all heard them call you. And so that is how I use the term we. I simultaneously, I'm asked all the time, what do you want people to take away from when you sing your shows or when you do parable to opera? And I'm like, that's just none of my business. It's like, I'm so not in charge of what people do. So it's so interesting to have a call to the we, but also really understand that it then is transformed. It is the technology of transformation, and anything can happen from there. And I think when I'm reaching out and using my voice to amplify something that I think actually affects all the living species on the planet, I'm at a point of desperation to reach as many as I can. And it's not so much like my reaching it's not a solving a problem. I'm almost like, casting the voice out into the valley. And then I'm just hoping that somebody answers back in an affirmative and it will meet me at least, and not as opposed to somebody, killing me. So I think like both of those things happen when the we call is made. and then I think people on the panel, maybe before this person raised their question, I did hear folks talk about the other species on the planet being a part of this knowledge base and this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And a few emergent things that I just want to underscore, right? That's come up a few times, and it happens in the call. And if there's a response, like the function of this disembodied technology and what it means to be disconnected or disembodied or isolated or individuated, et cetera, where there are the moments of being able to take responsibility and where in fact, it's actually the technology will fail because it requires a next point of contact, right? And so that's something that I heard this and I just want to bring it up and for us to hold. We got another question that I think came out of the doom and gloom conversation is, how do we keep pushing for revolution and liberation without sharing the direness of the situation? And of course, thank you for that question. Obviously, it's real. So does anybody have anything they'd like to offer as in relation to that question?
I'll jump in. That's definitely something the Slow Factory has been exploring. Prior to all of this, that was we started in 2008. 2012 is when we did our first things online. But between 2008 and 2012, we've been researching and trying to figure out ways to communicate certain things that were happening, whether they're in the Middle East or here. And without using what we call, war porn or poverty porn or these types of images that deprive humans from their dignity. And they are used, in a way to manipulate and control. And again, with this idea of doom and gloom, they have a specific narrative of disempowerment that ends up being recorded by whoever is watching, and then there's like, well, it's too much, what more can I do, and it does not lead to actual revolution. So it does not lead to uprising. What leads to uprising, and I think that it's a mix of both. Of course, we need to see the truth. We're not trying to protect you from seeing the truth, but there are a series of ethics that were developed around sharing this type of information. And I think that the more that we are seeing everybody being empowered to sharing information, pulling out a phone and recording something that's happening live, that's a different type of information than you using a still from that video to just convey something at the end of the day, or putting fonts in front of it, or using people as a backdrop to what you're trying to say. That's where it gets murky and it gets disrespectful of what's going on. So it's not a yes, it's a yes, and it's not a you can't do this and you can't do that. You can do everything, but you have to do it within the realm of understanding that who are you talking to, and who are you trying to inspire, and what is the action that you are asking the public here? What is the ideal scenario? What's your intention behind sharing this? Is it disgust? Is it rage? Is it shame? Are you leading with these ideas of fear? Because at the end of the day, these emotions will just go like this. Bloop. You'll get the likes, you'll get the shares, but it's not going to lead to anything more than that. And it's a question. It's an ongoing question. We've never led with these images. That's why it's taken so long for us to even have the platform that we have. But we are observing a lot of times how people are using bodies, other people's bodies, people that they've never met before and they have no relationship to, as a backdrop, as a decoration, as a sort of a background to some words that are essentially just continuing to uphold a system of fear and oppression. And so that's why the stories that we are sharing, they're sacred. We have to have the approval of everyone involved for us to share these stories. And at the end of the day, also this idea of I'll be the voice of the voiceless. There's no such thing as that. Nobody's a voiceless person, so that's extremely oppressive to say that, to think that. So there are many ways to explore sharing stories, to leading people into action without having to lead through fear and doom and gloom and these oppressive systems that don't end up where you want anyway. Like if you look at a map, it just stops at a certain point. It won't go where you want to go,
Mm, mm, mm. We have
I know you gotta go. I just want to say really quickly, the great Ruby Sales says that if you are very, very overwhelmed and you feel like you must address everything that you've intake, she asks you to step back and pick like something that's right in front of you, that you have access, and focus on that. That it is, if you know, as a revolutionary tool, you aren't going to solve all the things you can see, but like something that's right in front of you, you can get company on, you can focus on that, you will be a part of the overall solution.
Mm. Mm. Any conversation is a good conversation when Ruby Sales is invoked. So thank you for that. Absolutely. And I'm going to really kind of open for final thoughts. I'm going to tell you the questions that we're leaving on the table so you can pick them up, but also you can just share anything that comes to your mind or heart. This idea around languages as systems of understanding, and then also this idea of scale, that actually certainly the vast number of languages and people working in different directions are greatly outnumber this often singular language that we're asked to participate in. The people who are actually picking up what is right in front of them and working for the changes that we seek, right, are greatly outnumber, right? And so it's really about who has a platform to voice, right? Who is creating voicelessness, and actually, like, so that this idea of scale, that's actually, there's a tipping point there that we could comprehend, but we need to access one another. So that there's voices, technology, sharing local knowledge, the scale issue, and anything else that comes to your mind or heart. I'm just gonna quickly go through each of you because we have 4 minutes left. Amelia, would you be willing to kick us off?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. I guess something I would love to leave us with is something I try to do myself to keep from being overwhelmed. Is anytime I hear language around an individual responsibility of a collective problem, that I usually try to strike that and change it, right? Strike, like, how is this the responsibility of an individual, and why is it not? Why are we not thinking of it collectively? I don't believe in like an individual carbon footprint. I believe in like collective action. Like how are you, do not atomize yourself, do not allow yourself to be separated, because we can feel as though if everything is your fault, then it is very difficult to move forward. But if we are all holding a part of this together, if we're holding each other and we're moving forward, whether it's against the stream or it's with the current, I'm able to get more energy and life into the way in which I can connect with all of the incredible movements that I see. I also love to be part of movements that I can see with my own eyes and touch with my own hands, and to become part of things that I can measure without the mediation of any other technology, which I think keeps me again with the type of energy that I need to continue to do this very slow work, which is great. It'll be slow and it'll be for our whole life. So I guess I'll just leave you with that. That's my what I try to do every day, is remind myself that that it is not it will not be the measure of my own individual actions, but how well I'm connected to my community and how well I can continue to help my community connect to itself. So thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful. I love just hearing absolutely everything that everyone's talking about. It's so beautiful. I'm so enlivened by this, and just so thankful to be a part of this.
Thank you. Franklin.
I really have enjoyed this conversation. I just want to also plus 100 this great roaming, like really grounded riff. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to just maybe leave with where I started with this Baraka piece. And there's this great quote. This is Amiri Baraka from 1970, Technology and Ethos. And he says, "See everything fresh and without form, then make forms that will express us truthfully and totally. And by this, certainly free us eventually."
Gorgeous. Celine.
rushing to find my unmute button. Thank you so much for this beautiful invitation. I am so inspired by every one of you. I hope we continue the conversation. This is, as Amelia said, slow and steady wins the race, basically, although there is no race. And I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for Mozilla team for putting us together. The conversation brought me so much joy, and I haven't done panels in a long time, and I feel I'm leaving very inspired. So I hope that we were able to plant seeds of inspiration and plant seeds of hope, because that's all I can hope for.
Thank you. Toshi.
It's 12:30 and I believe in the clock. So I would just say I'm grateful to be here amongst you all. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for watching. Please tune in tomorrow at the same time for the Mozilla plenary, where we will be talking about the metaverse or the metaverse or the metaverse. Keep an eye on our social media at Mozilla Festival on Twitter, where we announce future dialogues and debates panels and other great things happening at MozFest this week. Special thanks to the whole team. We're out. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.